Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Storytime Podcast. I'm Paul Vecchione here with my co-host Steve Costello. We have some amazing guests with us today from Sachem. We're coming to you from the Thomas Sabadelli Alumni Gymnasium in Sachem, getting ready for a Bayshore Sachem football game. We're honored to have Chris Vaccaro with us, Jerry Figiani, two alumni from Sachem. It's great to have you guys here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's nice to be home. It's always good to be back here, and we're excited for the next hour of stories.
So I think I go in this gym and there's always highs and lows. And I remember having really I played great and I hit a lot of shots and I really thought I was going to be on the 11th grade basketball team. And I saw my name on the cut list and it's devastating. So I talked to Mr. Rich and, he said, we've got guys who are 6'10" and people going to the NBA. And I think, Chris, you would know this, almost every player from that 78-79 team went to a Division I college. And I think the depth of Sachem athletics, I did play baseball here as well as college, and just brings a lot of history. For me to be back at Sachem Homecoming for football is just a dream come true. Nevertheless, even if I was in the stands, but to have our podcast here on this special day is great. So I'm going to pop it back over to Jerry, who was actually my classmate and was the star. I know he's one of the most humble guys you'll ever meet, but was the star of our football team and I think took us to the Rutgers Cup and a lot of success. So Jerry, why don't you tell us just a little bit about your athletic career? And I believe you're in both the Sachem Hall of Fame and the Hall of Honor. So not only have you excelled in sports, but you've excelled off the field as well.
Yeah, I want to thank you guys for having me on today. It's just amazing to be back here. When you walk through the doors, right away the memories start coming back. And yes, I was part of the 77 Rutgers Cup team. It was an absolutely amazing bunch of guys. And I wouldn't be here if one of those guys was out of place. I got to play for the legendary Sachem football coach, Fred Frizaro, which was quite an experience. Actually, when I walk in the doors and I pass the auditorium, I remember a story. When we had orientation, all the players would have to gather at the auditorium. We all be down there in our shorts and T-shirts, and Coach Frizaro was going to come in and address the team. He came in like a tornado. And I remember sitting there and saying, I'm not playing. This guy's crazy. And that kind of set the tone for the rest of my playing days at Sachem. Another memory that comes back a lot is the first game we played, the 77 championship year. We played against our rivals, Pat Med. And we really, it was I believe it was the first time all three schools came together, right? Seneca, Sagamore, Samoset. So we had a great group of athletes playing. And we went into that first game and we were so cocky. We thought we could just walk on the field and that was it. They were going to give us the game. Didn't happen that way. They kicked our butts. And when we got back to Sachem, Coach Rizal let us know. As you know, years ago, we used to have the hills here, and it was up and down the hills all week. Needless to say, Pat Med went undefeated all the way. We won the rest of our games, and then we meet up for the Suffolk County Championship in West Islip, correct? He's the he knows all the stats. He may know my stats better than me, but 1,100. Oh no, almost 2,000. 1,800. Okay, see, he knows everything.
Wow.
Yeah, but we went the game. I remember getting off the bus for that game, and I never saw anything like it. I believe there was between 12 and 13,000 people at this high school, and you were there. So it was just, you got off the bus, and the adrenaline running through your body. And I knew the first hit of the game, I knew they weren't beating us. We had a little bad call at the end of the game where we gave them the ball back with like a minute left to go, but things turn out. Johnny Mathis made a game-saving, season-saving interception, and that sealed the deal. But just great memories.
He was a great athlete. He was on my baseball team, John Mathis, and
Yeah, Johnny was
incredible guy. He could fly.
He could play any
mean,
position.
really fast.
He could
And
play any position.
I think also what's brought us really back here and is the sense of community. And I think we're going to talk a lot about community during the podcast. But I also think it's so good just to see when we walked through the school earlier, there's children of all ages, cheerleading, looks like from maybe like grade school up. And then you've got the people out on the football field. And I think there's just so much danger. And this is part of what Paul is working on, to kids just being in their rooms and gaming and the isolation and the solitude. And, I had a lot of trouble with growing up in different things. And, I think of the Mr. Dragonets and I think of Mr. Stone and I think of the teachers in the Sachem program that cared so much, about me and said, hey, hang in there. You could be somebody, you could do whatever. And I think I'm here today really because of the Mr. Stones and, Mr. Dragonet. And just a small story was I was missing balls in the outfield, but I had a great bat. Mr. Stone sat me down. He said, if you're going to miss balls in the outfield, I really am not going to be able to play you. I love having your bat in the lineup. And we just sat there together and he goes, why don't you stay after for a couple hours and I'll drive you home. And he just hit balls to me. And the fact that somebody cared that much. And I just talked to another friend who's a doctor who was my best friend since first grade, Pete D'Amico. He's a doctor of child psychology. And he's like, yeah, after you did that time with Mr. Stone, I needed you in right field because you saved a couple of games that I was pitching. So it all kind of comes together. And I'm going to kick it back to Chris at this point because, Chris is really the conduit, Mr. Sachem, and really the reason that we're all here today. And, he keeps the Sachem stuff going, 100 miles an hour. So, Chris, you want to just weigh in on?
Listen, I'm a big believer in family, faith, community, and heritage as my core values. And the community itself is the lifeblood of bringing everybody together. What is the point of living there if you're not part of it? It's not good enough for me if you just pay taxes and have a house somewhere. What can you do to be involved? What will you do to get your kids involved? And I've been like that because of the opportunities that Sachem gave me. It was the teachers. It was the Mr. Makovsky, the 9th grade English teacher that said, you're doing a really good job on this Romeo and Juliet project in English class. Why don't you go write for the school paper that you might like that? Changed my life. I haven't stopped writing since that moment. I have been a journalist and a media executive and a producer and all these great things because of that conversation in this school district. I was going to say this building, but that was actually in Samoset, which was Sachem South at the time. So I've progressed my just caring to just doing as much as I possibly can. And my, thesis motto is honor the past and inspire the future. Bring alumni together to build a bridge with the current students so they could see the alumni, they could see the success stories. They look at the walls and go, I want to be on that wall. I want to make sure that people remember me from whatever I did. I want to make sure that when I'm here, I take advantage of every opportunity. And there are immense opportunities here. For me, it was the radio station, the school paper, and collectively the athletic program, because I could write about it, I could broadcast it. In this gym, I must have broadcast 40, 50 varsity basketball games on 91.9 WSHR. Talk about finding yourself, finding your voice, understanding how to make a connection to your peers and people as an audience in your community listening to you. Could you imagine having that experience at 15, 16 years old? It's why we're sitting here right now. It's why when you go, let's do something together with a podcast. I said, well, how do we do it with Sachem? How do we get Sachem involved? Make the connections, bring people together, and inspire everyone around.
Absolutely. I think also this is going to be a two-part because I do want to get into these, the difference in kids playing sports and children being out and about. So this is basically Jerry and Paul, because I know, Paul, you have a curriculum and it deals with bullying and it deals with, and Jerry actually has a karate studio and was recently given one of the highest degree black belts in Japan a week ago. We can't let that go without talking about that. He's got several books. Chris has a book. Chris has a couple of books. But what does it mean? We'll start with you, Paul. What does it mean to get these kids out from the Game Boy and the texting and the tweet, whatever they're doing, the TikToking? What does it mean for someone to be like out on the field today or in Jerry's karate class?
Absolutely. So I think in the last 20 years, a lot has changed. I think kids today are involved with things that, are different from when we were, their age. The social media, the video games, obviously everything that they're exposed to on all of those. It's easy for a kid to pick up, an iPad or, an iPhone or a video game and spend a whole lot of time, doing that. They're engaging, they're fun, but they're digital, and which means they're not outside. They're not with their peers. They're not playing sports. They're not playing basketball till the street lights come on. So part of what we're trying to do is bring kids back to that. Um, you know, Basically the opportunity to interact with others, in that forum. And I think something like a homecoming, in a great community like Sachem, with the help from all of you guys, Chris, bringing everybody, together in that, the same place where everybody kind of came into their own, really, the importance can't be overstated. And that's basically one of the things that we're trying to do. Because I feel like if we can get back to that, and obviously we're not going to go back, we're going to go forward, but let's figure out a way to get the communities together in a way where we can have more of these situations where people are interacting on a personal level and not through text messages, not through, the games, not through all of the things that kids have today, because I think the future really is kind of riding on it, guys. We have so much to do for these kids. And Jerry, I know you're working hand over foot, here to get kids in your gym doing things like that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. You know what? When you're talking, I like to go on the record to actually apologize to my teachers at Sachem because I was the kid with no direction. And everybody has their own story. My family, we moved out here from the city, and then my mom and dad divorced when I was at an early age. I still love them dearly to today. Speak to them, but I kind of lost my direction. And today in my classes, I talk about the importance of looking, feeling, sounding confident. So while my friends who graduated with me went on to college, I kind of fumbled around and was playing catch up. And I use a lot of these lessons today in my dojo. And I kind of hit home with that every single class that, each time there's a there's an etiquette that we use in the martial art class. Before we step onto the deck, every student has to bow. And I always ask the student, why do we bow? And they say, to you, sensei. And I say, no, it's not to me, it's to yourself. And a lot of students and young people, they kind of lose that respect for themselves. And when you respect yourself, you respect everybody. And that's the main lesson in the martial arts. I don't teach martial arts anymore for competition because I've seen over the years that children really need to make the right decisions in life to be successful. And, those poor decisions, they have consequences. So when I'll always tell a parent, when your child's in the street or playing in their community or with a group of friends or in school, there's no referee to say, hey, point, stop. They got to make those decisions on their own. And I've seen children make poor decisions and come back, like a student of mine, Robert Aliano, who went on to graduate from Quinnipiac University, had a terrible accident up there because of poor decisions and is lucky to be alive today. But children, getting back to Sachem, I had to look back and say, these teachers were trying to do their best for me to guide me, but I didn't give them the effort that I need from my students in class today. And a lot of the structure inside my dojo comes from my football because that was something I really wanted to do. I could have wrestled. Jack Mahoney sees me all the time and says, I wish you would have wrestled for me. I achieved a third degree black belt in judo. But again, not having that direction and not, you know, y- I tell children, we have a creed. If I could just go through it really quick. When the kids come into the school, they line up, they bow in, they have to recite a creed. It goes like this: I must develop myself in a positive manner, avoid anything that would reduce my mental growth or physical health. I must develop self discipline in order to bring out the best in myself and others. I must use common sense before self defense and never be abusive or offensive. So, those words actually mean nothing unless a child takes action on it. And that's where I try to hit home with the understanding of the ABCs of self defense, learning about awareness, creating boundaries, boundaries for yourself, personal boundaries, and communication. Children, besides not want to come out of the house, to get off those games, they don't understand the importance of communication. So that's a big thing. I tell them you have to communicate to the bully. If the bully's picking on you, you got to have the confidence and courage to say, "Hey, leave me alone." But you have to have the confidence to turn around and tell somebody. When I lived in the city, I got bullied a lot. And, that's part of being in the city. But I never told my father till I was like 30 years old some of the things that were happening to me. And, I try to teach children to recognize situations that make you feel uncomfortable. Unfortunately, my biggest bully was my first grade teacher. I was going to school. It was PS 117. I'm not going to say the teacher's name, but because I'm deaf in one ear, I couldn't pronounce words the correct way. So when I would get up in front of a class and read books, teacher would I'd hear these kids laughing at me, and I'm like, there's something wrong. So these emotions that build up, I didn't want to go back into the classroom. That may have, kind of stayed with me the course of my, you know, schooling, but it's something that people have to understand. They have the personal power to look inside and correct anything that they want to correct. If there's if you could communicate and face those challenges. So reading today, I have thousands. I never read a book in school. I have thousands of books in my house right now.
Well, I think to take off of what Jerry said, and I remember growing up in the Bronx, and I think I went to kindergarten in the Bronx, and I was left-handed. And two things: the kids used to steal my lunch money on the way into school. I was an easy target. And when I used to get home, my mom would be like, "Wow, you're really hungry today," but I wouldn't say that I didn't have lunch. And then they used to slap my hand with a ruler and make me write right-handed, and then it would like be a cat and mouse game. So that really wasn't, huge for my confidence. But getting to what Jerry said, and I'm kind of getting an understanding from all of us, is it's that one-on-one. You are a teacher, Paul. Paul is a teacher, and all we talk all the time about Paul's one-on-one, and his one-on-ones have either saved kids or this, that, the other thing. And I'm thinking there's a kid out here at Sachem High School who's going to play football today, and then there's those kids at your dojo. And would you both pretty much say that those kids next week aren't going to go shoot up a school somewhere? Because that's something when I grew up, we did the air raid drill where we went under the thing for the Russians or whatever. But I mean, I went to school. I never thought I was in harm in any way possible. So why don't really actually all three of you kind of.
You know what? When you're involved with athletics, all right, and that's something that I was involved with, and I'm just talking about athletics because that's what I was really involved with. You have to understand that there has to be not only a physical benefit but a mental benefit as well. So, for instance, if I'm teaching a particular stance in my dojo to a child, I could kind of tell if that student has really good self control or if they need to work on it a little bit more. So you recognize these things as they present themselves. The quiet kid, maybe it's the quiet kid at the school table, the lunch table. Paul, because you're actually in the schools. I get the kids coming from the schools that are being picked on. Their self-esteem is in the dumps. I can't even talk about bullying sometimes in class without kids tearing up because I know I'm hitting them. Because recently, this past week, I have a absolutely wonderful student. He's getting ready for his junior black belt. I was talking about bullying. This kid, I don't have a boy, but if I had a boy, this kid would be a great example. Somebody really respectful. And as I'm talking, I'm just seeing him tear up. And I knew right away he was having a problem. I called him in the office, and now he's talking to his mother, and hopefully he gets it resolved. But Paul, I'm sure you see this every day.
Well, I think the first thing that I'm kind of hearing here, obviously, you two gentlemen came from a different generation, in terms of what teachers represented to each of you, in school. Yeah, I guess that's a nice way to say it. But no, what I mean is the profession has changed because society has changed, kids have changed, education has changed. So taking on the role as a teacher today is a lot different than what it was, when you guys were in school. But to me, I always tell this story. I couldn't wait to go into my interview for my teaching job. I had, X amount of education. I was ready to go for and this reason. I can teach the kids English. So, in 2004, I was, given the position to be a teacher. 20 years later, I think that if I look back at that interview, the first thing I would say to those people who were on that committee, first thing you have to do is reach a child. You have to get to them on a level that maybe they don't get at home. Maybe they don't get with their friends. Maybe they don't
I
get from
call
other
that
teachers.
connecting before you correct.
No doubt.
That,
And,
that's
you
the
know,
term
and
I use.
from what I've learned as a teacher is getting that emotional connection with a kid. You can teach them anything you want after that. You can teach them Shakespeare. You can teach them, anything you want because they trust you. They know they have somebody there who's mentoring them for their lives on top of their education. So, I think that one of the more important concepts here is that these have all kind of evolved. All these things have evolved, and Chris can actually speak to this. Him and I were speaking about this off camera, off the out like to the field before, and that sense of community, bringing people together, that's different than what it was 20, 30 years ago. And you have gentlemen like Chris bringing, going the extra mile to work extra hard to bring people in the community together. That connection, aside from the schools, aside from the dojo, things like that outside of school, the athletics, having that sense of connection and community is a huge part of what we're trying to do with Long Island Prep, with this podcast, with everything else. So, Chris, why don't you speak a little bit about that if you can?
It really boils down to believing in something bigger than yourself. And what better way to do it when you're actually younger and living in it? The problem is students are so overwhelmed with so many tasks, responsibilities, social stimulants. They don't, it's one extra thing to be able to say, oh, I love my community. They don't get it like that. It's definitely something you really experience after. I was fortunate that when I was here, I saw all these things and I saw a lot of proud people and I saw the coaches and the alumni. I remember sitting in this gym for the first ever Sachem Athletic Hall of Fame event in 2003, front row, taking pictures, recording notes, going, this is awesome. We had a guy in the NBA, we had a guy in the NFL, we had a guy in Major League Baseball, and all their coaches are getting inducted. And so I'm putting the pieces together at 17 years old, going, this matters. This place matters. As I matured, progressed, and realized I could be a part of that, not only did I actually bring back the Sachem Athletic Hall of Fame after 13 years of dormancy, I did it with the goal of believing in something bigger than all of us. And at that, as you guys know, I believe in Long Island, Suffolk County. I run the Suffolk County Sports Hall of Fame. I run Italian American heritage organizations. I run educational foundation in this community, something totally different than sports, because I can connect the dots to make sure that people, if I impact one person to say, oh, this is a big deal. This is bigger than me. I want to help. This is bigger than me. How can I get involved? I know that it's way more than one person I'm impacting. But if it's one a day, one a week, one a month, that's fine. That's a nice barometer.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. So Steve always talks about building a ball club. When you have like-minded people who are trying to do that for the benefit of others, I mean, what's better? Because we all have the same goal in mind, and to have you guys around, all of us doing all of these things, to me is
Paul, can I ask you a question? Because I get, the beginning of the school year, I get the phone calls. My kid's getting bullied. My kid's getting harassed. My kid's doing this. As you know, I run since 2003. I've been running anti-bullying, anti-gang programs for Suffolk County PAL. Like I was talking about, what I was talking about before about children taking action on those words. I don't think a lot of parents today are taking action, trying to get, like what Chris is saying, get their children involved. That's so important today.
So, Jerry, I could not agree more. And that is probably the missing piece. When you put it all together. And Chris and I had this conversation also. The importance of family, the importance of that, that presence outside of school, outside of your friends. That is the missing piece. I don't know what happened to this generation or why these parents feel like they don't need to be a part of their kids' lives, part of what we're trying to do, part of all of the programming that I put together with Long Island Prep and everything else. The parents are probably the most important piece of that.
That event you put together for Long Island Prep. My wife attended. And when we left that event that night, she says, wow. She says, thinking about this, how important this is to, have your children communicate with you, whether they're having problems in school or outside of school, the importance of trying to, connect with mentors and people. There are more good people in the world than bad, and you got to connect
You
to
got to
them.
connect them. You got to bring them together and think about it. How do you get that message across? You do it with education. You do it with information. You educate the parents on their role in their child's life. Because I tell you what, and I can speak to this as a teacher, as being a parent myself, and seeing what goes on in my community. The parents are such an important part. I don't think half of them know what they need to be doing. So we put together a huge, parent education, adult education program to get that information to them so they can be a major part of the pie again, because that's lacking and that's something that we need to address.
I think society today too is has changed. Being the oldest one up here, it's a lot
And not the
different,
oldest by much.
but it's a lot different. I remember being on the streets in Greenwich Village as a young boy, 5 years old, out in front of my great grandmother's house. My parents, my uncles, aunts, everybody was upstairs. You didn't have to worry about the things that are going on today. And if you just turn the TV on, it shows you it's like looking in the mirror, what's going on today. Everything is violence. There's nothing wholesome today on TV. You got to find, even stations that you thought were going in a certain direction that would benefit young children. Being a grandparent now, I listen to this stuff and I'm like, you better change the channel in there.
And that's what I'm saying. That all of that information, that education to give people what they need to know. This is what your children are exposed to. These are the things you have to help them avoid. These are the things you have to teach them. I mean, it's like family 101. It's parenting 101. I didn't go to a class to be a parent. You know who I learned from? My mom and dad. My
Absolutely.
my grandparents, my family.
I want to just take a step back, and because we kind of glossed over, but I happen to be on the board, and Chris is executive director of the Suffolk County Hall of Fame. And if I remember the first meeting or the first time we were out at Timber Point, and the original Suffolk Hall of Fame was held in like the basement of a hotel. I didn't go there. I wasn't there. And basically all of the notes for 50 years were like on loose leaf paper. And when you really see, and going to the last 3 or 4 dinners, and you see that Suffolk County literally makes imprint around the entire world of sports, everywhere from soccer to baseball to football to the honorees have ranged from Bob Costas to Pat LaFontaine and Ralph Macchio, and the speeches have been, and I really think that's something that, you should almost take your kids to and say, hey, look at what is possible, look at what is possible. And I really want to kick it back to Chris because I mean, building a ball club, and I have to tell you and I remember being out with you that day, and we discovered that Satchel Paige played baseball in Riverhead, and Carl Yastrzemski was a bat boy that day. And I really just feel like Suffolk County is one of the most special, places. And before I do kick it to you, I'm thinking, these three greatest Suffolk County athletes ever, which is Neil Heaton, Jumbo, and Rulin. The school's been around for 65 years, and Jerry and I went to school with all of them. So it was like, it was that that little 4-year period where three, total superstars, one guy winning a couple Super Bowls and, came in. So Chris, why don't you just go like maybe one step deeper in Sachem involvement, but the Suffolk Hall of Fame, and how globally reaching that is, and a couple of the stories of people who've come back and gotten the awards.
Yeah, listen, it's a special place where we come from. There's a lot of incredible people, not just from Suffolk County, but Long Island as a whole. Obviously, I view everything in the spectrum of our hometown here in Sachem, Lake Ronkonkoma. I live in Lake Grove. But to extend that further, I love local history. I love the sports history that has to do with people and places. So you mentioned Satchel Paige. Well, that's part of the historical marker program that I put together to make sure that people don't forget or never even probably knew, wow, this place is where this person did something very special. And in that case, Satchel Paige was on a barnstorming trip in 1950, and it happens to be on the same property as Riverhead School District offices. You know, Carl Yastrzemski is from here. Craig Biggio, Baseball Hall of Famer, is from Kings Park here. Boomer Esiason. These are people that have left their mark. I like to be the person, and I am in this role as the president of the Suffolk Hall of Fame, who, lets everybody know or lets everybody not forget that these people came from here. And the key is bringing them back. Maybe they live here still. Maybe their family's here. Maybe they just come back for that one night. You mentioned the speeches. The people that get recognized in our Hall of Fame care about it. They love it. It really matters to them. Bob Costas came out here in the middle of a very busy travel week, going back and forth between St. Louis and Manhattan. I got a car service for him. He gave an incredible speech.
Incredible.
I mean, it's almost difficult to just say Bob Costas gave a speech. Wow. No, Bob Costas is the single greatest potentially broadcaster in the history of the craft, who grew up in Comac and never forgot where he came from. Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL, couldn't make it to the Hall of Fame induction when I inducted him. Hey, come up to the NHL offices in Manhattan, please. I would love to see you. Presented his plaque right in front of the Stanley Cup. Gio from WFAN, young guy, more modern example. Doesn't even, one of those humble reactions, like, really, me? You got Yastrzemski in here. You got Boomer in here, his radio partner. Yeah, you deserve it too. You're reaching millions of people every day with your craft and your ability to broadcast. Linda Cohen, we see her every day on SportsCenter. Every day. She grew up in Center Reach. I can't make it in there. I'm in LA. I'm doing a lot of hockey broadcasting. I'm busy. No problem, Linda. I'm going to be on the next plane out to LA. We're going to meet up in California. That would be great. I presented her plaque in California. The conversation that my wife and I had with Linda, you just feel a great connection. And what does it get back to? We're all from the same community. And the community doesn't need to just be one zip code. In our case, it's a county. It's an island. And I'll tell you right now, you don't have that feeling in other places because there is no other island like this. It is a long island. It's 118 miles long. It's 26 miles wide, but it's right in the Northeast, right next to Manhattan. So there's this little extra emphasis where all of our family came from the city. All of our family, in this case, literally immigrated here from Italy. They fought to be here. So did the Irish. So did the Germans. There's something here, this elixir, that people migrated, immigrated, fought together. And so now let's not forget those stories, whether it's sports, education, or just community at large.
Jerry, I think Boomer had a hard time with us, didn't he? Do you remember that game?
Well, again, you guys are younger than me, so I think I did scrimmage. We did scrimmage against him one year, and I remember walking onto the field. There was this big, tall quarterback, and
Viking-looking quarterback.
Yeah, actually, and I never got a chance to play against him, but I heard.
But didn't we beat them?
Yeah,
you beat them twice, right?
1978 was the Boomer game.
Right.
77 we beat Pat Med, Jerry's starting running back. First running back, by the way, in Sachem history to break 8,000 career yards.
But could I throw something in there? Because
I'm about to go on a tangent here. Yeah.
They'll be mad at me if I don't mention them. David Simmons, thanks for blocking. And Brian Dale, I love you.
Brian Dalen won the Hanson Award, best quarterback,
Yes.
best player in the county.
Yeah,
So 78, we beat Boomer in the Suffolk County Championship. 79, we beat West Islip.
Yep. And actually, Boomer always spoke about he felt more pressure in the East Islip, West Islip games than he did when he was playing for the NFL.
Well,
You
if
can
he
hear him
played-
say that on WFAN.
If he did play Sachem every game,
Maybe it would have felt differently.
He wouldn't have made the NFL.
Very true.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Kicking it back, one thing, Paul, is I know a couple of our sponsors for today is Lori Zark is a sponsor, and just rescuing and saving one dog at a time, and also Long Island Prep with some of the work you're doing. So we could just kick back to you, and I really think and if you look at like what I went through, it's like one student at a time. And it just seems like that the sad thing, if there's anything sad that I'm taking all of this, and I can't tell everyone how afraid of Jerry. I'm like the same size as Jerry now, but I feel like when we were in school, he was in like the weight room, like with the whole rack. And I was doing like the curling thing with like 20 on it. And I was
He
hoping
had 60 on
he
it.
didn't look at
Oh,
me.
when he was 18, he looked like he was
Well,
35.
Yeah.
I played at
And
220.
now,
I'm 220.
and now
I'm
I'm like,
225
That's
yeah,
today.
now I'm like, I might have a chance if he wasn't a ninth degree black belt. Now,
None
now
of
I
us,
got that to
after
none
the
of us have a
podcast,
chance.
Steve.
I only have to worry about him being this
Steve,
giant
after the
man. I was like
podcast.
this little
Oh,
90-pound
oh.
kid. Now, if I'm like, hey, I got to get even with
That's
this
great.
guy, he's a ninth degree black
I
belt.
guarantee you, if 3 of us tried to beat him at the same time,
Forget
it wouldn't
ain't
help.
he would
happening.
take us
It
all
ain't
out.
But I really want to say too, and maybe we each want to just go and mentor, is I just want to say that those faculty and those teachers that said, here's Steve Costello, and I'm going to take this kid, I'm going to spend 2 hours hitting fly balls to him. And Mr. Stone, who's now deceased, and Mr. Dragonette, who's at West Hampton, I think he's a starter. And I gave the guy the biggest hug. And those were really the people that kind of got my compass, and got me, straight. And Mrs. Rosenthal and, Mr. Gertzenberg. And I could just think of so many. And I think we really have to like applaud, I'm feeling like we really got to say, here are our mentors, and we got to have like a round of applause for them. And we also got to understand whether you're a kid in the Bronx in 1960, whatever, and they're taking your lunch money and the teacher's beating you with the, bullying is just never going away. But I think in today in 2024, when the bully, when the kid who's being bullied gets upset, they're taking drastic actions, and they're taking actions that weren't even thought about, in the 70s and whatever. When you had a beef, it was with fists. It wasn't with knives or
That's why
guns.
it's so important to give them the tools today. They need to know, about awareness. Children, again, everybody's distracted today, especially with social media. They need to understand it's 3 simple steps, right? But they need to create boundaries. Sometimes they need to step away from the friends that they're hanging with. And then communication, you could add courage and confidence to that as well. Because, if you don't have those things in place, it's going to be very difficult to navigate through it.
So going back, Jerry, who were the 2 or 3 teachers, coaches that you just like to shout out and go, wow?
Listen, again, if you were a teacher, my apologies to you, even to Coach Fred Fazoro. I always tell my students to look, feel, sound confident. I don't think I gave him 100% when I was playing for him. And, I didn't feel confident back then. I think I got by on, talent. I had some talent. I had some good athleticism. But, looking back, if I really would have applied myself the way I applied myself to my martial arts, and I did that to play catch up, I think I could have had records here at Sachem that I don't think anybody would have beat. And looking back at what he was trying to get out of me, and I wasn't giving it to him. I have to go back again because I want to get that out of my students today. And I use not the methods that he does, having my students run hills, but trying to get to them to understand that, you want to bring out the potential that you have inside you. And you need that hard work ethic, and you need to stay focused. Just recently, I was honored to have dinner at his house, which was just like a mix of emotions to hang out with him. And, Chris was there that night, and it was just something that, I'll never forget. And again, anything that I have accomplished here, there were friends along the way that gave me that confidence that they're still important in my life today. The Brian Dalers, the Gino Minettis, Pete Velez's, those guys that, they still, you know, eh, they believed in me back then when I didn't believe in myself. Um, and, Fred Frizell has to be number 1, head and shoulders.
Awesome. Chris, you want to tackle that question?
Yeah, I mentioned.
Get it?
Yeah, I got it. I mentioned Robert Makovsky, my 9th grade English teacher. I said that story. two others. I just have a really good recollection of my sixth grade teacher at Waverly Elementary School, Chucky Romer. You know, it was the first male teacher I had in school, and I just felt like a different connection. I always tell my parents, like, up until that point, I don't know what you guys were doing with me. I don't know if I had a focus. And I'm looking at my own kids, like, you guys have to have focus. You need to know what to do. You know, you have to get ready for practice. They're playing 3 sports. They're active. My kids are very active. Me, I was like, I'm just trying to figure things out. But when I had this male role model who I could look up to, handsome guy, actually literally looks like Jesus, handsome, beard, fit. He taught us chess. He had a foosball table in there. He would compliment the way we looked. All these things now I think back on, like the way we dressed, the way we acted, the way if we made him laugh, he patted us on the back in a way that gave us confidence that you don't understand when you're 12, but you understand now. So I'll forever be appreciative of that. Fred Pissarro, when I was a junior at Sachem, covering Sachem, writing about Sachem, broadcasting about Sachem. First of all, I had the fortitude to go up to him in his coach's office in the phys ed room in the gym downstairs and say, "Hey, coach, I need to ask you a few questions about the season. I'm writing a story about the program." Oh, well, what are you going to ask me? Like right there, 60-something-year-old guy about to retire, doesn't need to prove anybody to anything, but he embraced me, brought me in. He said, the original muckraker around here was Rich Cimini. And I said, I know Rich. I want to be Rich one day. And I've become very friendly with Rich, who has been covering the Jets literally longer than anybody has ever covered the Jets. And so that conversation in that coach's office where he embraced me as a journalist, not just a student, made me feel good. And I'll never forget that. And I've always respected him ever since that moment. And so Makovsky, Pissarro, Romer, these men gave me confidence.
We're going to go to Paul. I know you didn't have a lot of Sachem mentors here, but
I didn't, but just if I can just talk about being a teacher myself and hearing.
Oh yeah, you are a teacher. That's right. Okay, all right. So
But hearing all of you talk about who's influenced you, who's brought you to this point in your lives, you can look back and say, I wouldn't be here without X, Y, and Z. It's part of why I went into teaching, but it's also because I've got my own teachers in my past. And it's funny, Chris mentioned, the first male teacher he had influenced him in a big way. Same thing with me. I was a fifth grader, Mr. Hunter. He was different than the teachers before him, where he just had a different atmosphere in his classroom. I mean, we learned about the ocean, we learned about the clouds, we learned about we hatched ducks. We just did cool stuff that I will never forget as a 12, 13-year-old. And then coming into middle and high school, really high school, I think the one or two guys that I just have to shout out, and I really hope that they get to hear this, Bob Patagno and Kevin Murphy. So they were two. One was my ocean science teacher. One was my American history teacher. And I always thirsted for knowledge. I always wanted to know things. And history and science were my two favorite subjects, which is strange because now I teach English. But those two, those guys taught me so much about things, but they also connected, on a level that I will never forget, that they kind of brought me to this point in time where I'm at now. And it's fun because I got to go back and actually teach with them, going back to my high school to teach with them. And teachers, when they're in front of kids and, when they're in front of their colleagues, are two completely different animals. But when you get to know them on a personal level, back from when you knew them as a student, it's truly special. And it's part of why I do what I do.
and one of the things, just thinking, this podcast, obviously for all of us, bring us together, and it's kind of been just so smooth, is I think something like this, could you imagine doing it in front of like the student population, like towards the end of school, whether it's West Islip, Sachem, because, and not only doing it for the students, but not maybe even for the faculty, because, maybe Mr. Stone passed away not knowing what he meant to me, and I'm thinking definitely about, I'm thinking about that a little bit. And I'm thinking about what a difference, you're making the difference on the front line. I also want to take a minute during this podcast, and I do want to kind of salute all of our veterans that went to Sachem, because Jerry and I, in the Hall of Honor, was one of our classmates that passed away in Vietnam, I believe. Chris, you would know. Vincent, was it?
From your class, I forget which one was the
Yeah, but it
inaugural
was
one.
he's in the Hall of Honor.
Several that have
Yeah, so I mean, there
died
are
serving our
a lot of
country.
people who have not played in the NBA, and they haven't opened a dojo, and they haven't been a sports agent, but they've gone and they've defended our military and they've defended our shores. And, that's critical too. And that is something that we should all, embrace the American flag and embrace their service. I'm sure there's plenty from West Islip. I'm sure there's plenty from, I lived in West Hampton, and a lot of those kids are out at the Army base out there at Kabreski.
I've estimated there's at least 2,000 young men and women who have served from Sachem alone.
All right, so from Sachem High School, Chris has got this kind of the stats, but 2,000 of our students have literally gone and represented our country. So, I mean, I still during this is I know we're getting towards the end, but I still have kind of goosebumps from being here, and it just brings back going and seeing the lockers, and I really pinch myself because it is a sense of community, and every day I wake up, between Lori's Arc and mentoring, and I know we have this book in the works now that I think got a shot in the arm today just from us talking about it, but every day let's just see what we could do to help and mentor, and the sense of community. And Jerry, you and Paul are really doing it on a daily basis in real time, so how do even Chris and I know we're involved in a lot of stuff, but hopefully this podcast will and bring some people on. So I'm going to kick it back to my co-host Paul.
Sure. So we'll just do one more quick segment here, if we can. It's 2024. We're headed into the fall here. We've got a lot of work to do, gentlemen. I feel like we've got a great team, and it's building. And I'm honored to sit next to each and every one of you. So, real quick, what do you guys see? What are we going to do quickly in the next couple of months here? What are we thinking about?
Well,
Going forward.
actually, every day when I walk through my doors, I'm thinking of what that mission is to get across to even just one student.
Kid. Yep.
Like I talked about that boy last week. He's been with me 2.5 years, but I think last week the lesson really hit because, sometimes these children hear the words, but it doesn't sink in. That's why they cannot hear it enough. They cannot hear it enough. My anti-bullying program has expanded out to stranger danger, where I had a 7-year-old boy was able to defend himself against a pedophile in a Stop and Shop.
Wow.
Oh my God.
I mean, that's
bathroom.
real. That is
Yeah,
real
it's real.
time stuff.
It's
there,
real, and so every day it's like I'm going to the battlefield. I'm trying to get these kids to understand, it's okay to walk away. Be a leader, not a follower. We have a saying, good, better, best, after every time they do a technique. But you could apply that in your life when, you go to work one day, or, the job doesn't go your way. And the next day you come back, you take a second crack at it to make it better. And, getting these children to understand that it is a little bit more difficult than it was, I'm going to say, 10 or 15 years ago. Actually, I'm going into my 35th year come 2025. But my first years of opening up East Coast Black Belt Academy, those students that came into those doors, they wanted knowledge. They wanted to understand how the martial arts could help them, not only, win a tournament, but in life. And again, as I continue to mature in my teaching, that's why I kind of took a step back from the tournaments, because today the real fight is with yourself. Can you show good self-discipline? Can you show self-control? Do you have perseverance? Do you have the ability to walk away from something, without hitting back? That's why we always say common sense before self-defense. And to be able to educate the public, people look at martial arts, they see what's on TV, they see what's going on in the octagon, and all that stuff is good if that's what you're into. But there's a lot more, deeper teachings that come from it, and that's what I want to pass along. When I go to Okinawa, they kind of chuckle about what we do in here in America about martial arts. And I remember one of my first visits, my instructor took me to a school to see boys and girls in the classroom. I noticed they were playing games like our children do. And I said, "Oh, you guys are into video games?" He goes, "No." He goes, "We make them. Your children play with them."
Awesome. Thank you, Jerry.
Chris.
Yeah, first of all, I think you have us to lean on for anything in terms of curriculum, speakers, ideation, brainstorming. So whatever we can do next couple months, next couple years, doesn't matter. We're here. Two things that I have my teeth sunk into a bit now. We just announced the Leadership Institute I'm building between the Suffolk County Sports Hall of Fame and Suffolk County Police Athletic League. The purpose is to bring our Hall of Famers into PAL events to mentor kids. If it's before a practice, before a game, at a special event, I want those kids who are baseball, football, soccer, lacrosse players to hear from our Hall of Famers about their journey. Again, one conversation, one kid, one at a time, just impacting. The other thing is that we're actually about to announce we're launching the Sachem Education Foundation, which will help generate grant money and funding for curriculum programs beyond your standard day-to-day K-12 curriculum. And so that is going to put money back into the school district, back into programming beyond what is standard. And so that programming, though, will be STEM related. It'll be hands-on. It will be tactical for students and teachers to hopefully make a difference in what they're doing, helping the teachers help the kids. And so those are two big things that are happening right now. One is announced. I mean, I just announced both of them really technically on this podcast, but there'll be a lot more rhetoric and information about it. And it's all about the kids. It's all about the next generation. It's making sure they get that baton and we give them the support they need to succeed.
I love it. I'm just going to piggyback on that. Our slogan for Long Island Prep, let's make the future smarter together. I think that is just spot on with what we're all trying to do here. Steve kind of touched on it briefly about what's going on with the mass shootings, with the mental health, with the drug overdose issues going on across the country. I think this, it's all hands on deck here. We need to put a halt to some of the things that are going on. That's what Long Island Prep is trying to do. That's what Jerry does with his program. Chris, you've got, so many things going on with what you're trying to do to help kids. And I think we all need to kind of pull our capes up here and get to it because we have a lot of work to do. So that's how I'll kind of kick it off to Steve. Maybe we'll close it out here.
Yeah, we're going to close it out. Jerry, always amazing spending time with you. And we weren't that close back in school, but the last 25 or so years.
I was actually scared of you.
Yeah. And Chris, once again, you do have a unique gift of shining lights on things from marketing and your accomplishments. And, it takes me about 6 days to do what you do in one day, but I'm working on that.
I think if we bottle his energy, we could make $1 million
exactly.
fast.
And then, Paul, you've just been an awesome co-host. I just really, my dream is to see this in an assembly where there's 500 or 600 kids and we could each talk to some of them afterwards because, when I got into Hall of Honor that day, there was 1,700 people that said, how the hell did he figure that out? So, you can bloom, and you can find success at any time, but I think it's one kid at a time. And I think there's been some great Sachem stories, some great Sachem messages. I've wanted to go to homecoming for the last 5 years and watch football. I'm going to do a little of that today. And I think it's just a wrap with, with some great community spirit and people who've actually, one-on-one people who are doing the blocking and tackling, in mental health and in mentoring and from the Suffolk County Hall of Fame to the dojo. And, and there is one thing I've had on my mind for, I'd say the last, couple segments is we just can't drink and drive. And, Paul was directly affected with knowing those kids who, from West Islip or West Babylon that passed away, the last couple of days. And it was somebody doing 100 miles an hour down Main Street. And you know what? You can't be doing drugs. You can't be driving. You can't be drinking. Take an Uber. There weren't Ubers when Jerry and I was around. You went to sleep on the side of the road or whatever. But, be careful out there. Drinking and driving. If bullying's been around for 60 years, we've been around, so is drinking and driving. And you got to say no, man, because, a couple of really innocent lives and they were bright students and they were beautiful people. And, I hate to end the podcast on that, but it is something that's critical. Paul, if you just want to.
Yeah. So, I mean, great message. It's great having, Jerry Figiani here, Chris Vaccaro. I'm here with Steve Costello on the Storytime podcast. And all I will say is this. We have work to do. Your message, and your message together. We're going to help a lot of people. So thank you for joining us today on the Storytime podcast. We do want to shout out Pasquale Consenzo and his team, our executive producer, for bringing us here, getting everything set up for us, and putting together a nice podcast today on this Saturday afternoon from Sachem North High School. We do want to thank Lori Zark for their sponsorship. Just go to lorizark.com and, of course, longislandprep.org for all the information on what we're doing. Thank you so much for joining us on the Storytime Podcast, everybody. Have a great day.
And we also want to thank Max Jarvis, our intern, up and coming.
All right, Max. Awesome, dude.
Thank you.